Since ancient times, the Vikings have been remembered not just for their fierce battles, but also for their incredible skills in navigation and shipbuilding. Imagine, for a moment, boarding a ship that slices through rough seas, carrying its crew to distant lands, without the help of engines, electricity, or any modern tools. How is it possible that these northern people, living in often harsh conditions, managed to build vessels that were so strong, fast, and efficient? In this video, we're going to dive into the fascinating journey of Viking ship construction. We'll explore the materials they used, the techniques they relied on, and how human ingenuity overcame the absence of modern technology. Get ready to uncover the secrets that turned these ships into true icons of maritime history. By the end, you'll see that even without electricity or machinery, the Vikings developed methods that ensured the durability and success of their legendary vessels. But before we explore how these ships were made, it's important to understand the historical and cultural context that made them such an essential part of Viking life. To truly appreciate the greatness of Viking ships, we first need to understand who the Vikings were and what their connection to the sea was. The Vikings were the people of Scandinavia, what we now know as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, between the 8th and 11th centuries. Living in a land of deep fjords, steep mountains, and long coastlines, the sea wasn't just a route for travel. It was a natural extension of their daily lives and survival. From a young age, Vikings were trained to sail and to face the challenges of the open ocean. To them, the sea was a path to opportunity, whether for trade, exploration, or even military raids. Contrary to popular belief, the Vikings were not just raiders. They were also skilled merchants and explorers who reached as far as North America, centuries before Columbus. These northern men and women used their ships for many purposes: long voyages to discover new lands, transporting goods and people, fishing, and of course, fast and strategic attacks. Their ships had to be versatile enough to handle open seas, yet agile enough to navigate rivers and rocky coasts. There were different types of Viking ships, each designed to meet specific needs. The famous Drakkar, or warship, was wide, fast, and maneuverable, perfect for raids and battles. Its prow often featured a carved dragon or serpent, meant to strike fear into the hearts of enemies. The Gnar, on the other hand, was a sturdier and more stable vessel, built to carry heavy cargo and passengers on long trading voyages. Then there was the Snekker, smaller and swift, ideal for patrols and surprise attacks. These ships reflect the Vikings' deep connection to nature and their remarkable ability to make use of the resources around them. The sea, the wind, and the forest timber were all essential elements. And building these ships required not just access to materials, but a deep understanding of the environment, combined with tradition and innovation. Understanding this context is the first step toward appreciating the craftsmanship behind these vessels. In the next chapter, we'll begin unraveling that process, starting with the natural materials that made these ships so exceptional. If Viking ships still impress us today with their strength and efficiency, much of that comes down to the careful choice of materials used in their construction. Far from relying on complex metal alloys or modern composites, Viking shipbuilders sourced everything they needed directly from nature, and they did it with near-surgical precision. The primary resource was wood, and selecting the right type made all the difference. Oak was the preferred choice for the ship's main structure, especially the hull. This wood is naturally tough, dense, and durable, perfect for withstanding the force of waves and the constant pressure of the sea. For less demanding parts like masts or oars, they used pine, ash, or elm, lighter woods that were easier to work with. But it wasn't just about choosing the right tree. The timing of the cut was just as important. Builders paid close attention to the seasons, preferring to fell trees in winter when the sap was low and the wood drier, reducing the risk of rot. They also favored naturally curved trees for specific parts of a ship, such as the internal ribs, avoiding the need to bend the wood artificially, which saved time and preserved its strength. Another essential material was rope, made from natural fibers like hemp, flax, or even twisted tree roots. These ropes were used all over the ship, from securing the sails to binding planks in more delicate parts of the construction. They needed to be strong, water-resistant, and completely reliable at sea. To seal the gaps between the hull's planks, the Vikings used a mix of dried moss, animal hair, pine resin, and wood tar, the latter produced by slowly burning wood in covered pits. This natural sealant kept water out and greatly increased the ship's longevity. The strong, smoky scent of tar clung to the ships and is still recognizable in modern replicas today. Leather and animal hides were also used for linings, carrying bags, and, in some early cases, even sails. Later on, treated linen coated with animal fat or wax became more common for sails, as it was lighter and better at catching the wind. The way the Vikings used these natural materials reveals not just their ingenuity, but also a deep respect for the environment. They understood that surviving at sea depended entirely on the quality of their materials and how skillfully those elements were combined. Now that we've explored the materials that brought Viking ships to life, it's time to look at the tools they used to turn raw logs and natural fibers into true seafaring machines. And as we'll see next, they did it with surprising simplicity. Turning tree trunks into vessels capable of crossing oceans was no simple task. What's even more impressive is that the Vikings did it using tools that could fit inside a small leather pouch. No power saws, no engines, no trace of electricity, just hand tools, forged with precision and used with remarkable skill. At the heart of nearly all the work was the axe, one of the most versatile and essential tools in the Viking toolkit. Unlike the typical axe we imagine today, Viking woodworking axes had wide blades and curved handles, allowing for deep, controlled cuts. With it, craftsmen could fell trees, strip bark, shape beams, and even carve specific components of a ship. It was, quite literally, an extension of the builder's hand. Another key tool was the chisel, used for fine detailing and delicate joints. When paired with a wooden mallet, the chisel allowed shipwrights to carve precise fittings between planks and shape the ship's internal ribs. Gouges were also common, used to smooth surfaces and adjust small features, especially on the deck and along the hull edges. These tools were forged from iron, which Vikings obtained from or mined in mountainous or boggy regions. Viking blacksmiths mastered the art of smelting and shaping iron, using simple furnaces fueled by charcoal and hand-operated bellows to reach the high temperatures needed. Each tool was crafted by hand, and many were passed down through generations, treasured items of real artisanal value. The Vikings also used hand-powered augers, primitive drill-like tools, for boring precise holes in wood. This was essential for securing hull planks, especially when using iron rivets or wooden pegs to hold the structure together. Rough-hewn planes, made from stone or metal, were used to level surfaces and align planks for tighter seals. But perhaps the most astonishing aspect of these tools wasn't their shape, it was the knowledge required to wield them. Viking shipbuilders, known as bat-bigger, didn't follow blueprints or written plans. Their knowledge was oral and experiential, passed down through decades of hands-on learning, observation, and repetition. Every curve in the wood was judged by eye. Every joint was shaped by feel and experience. This technical mastery made up for the lack of modern precision. Where we'd rely on rulers, squares, or laser measurement tools, the Vikings trusted their trained eyes, their sense of touch, and the wisdom of tradition. They knew that a single mistake could compromise the safety of the ship, and at sea, that meant lives were at stake. With simple tools, forged with care, and hands guided by heritage, the Vikings shaped their ships as if carving their own survival. Now that we've seen the tools, it's time to understand how all the pieces came together in a construction process that bordered on ritual, a technique so effective it still baffles engineers and historians today. With materials in hand and tools sharpened, Viking shipbuilders were ready to begin a process that combined precision, tradition, and generations of refined knowledge. Building a Viking ship wasn't just physical labor. It was almost a ritual, a collective effort that demanded meticulous attention to every detail. The technique used was known as clinker construction. Unlike modern shipbuilding, where planks are placed edge to edge, clinker involved overlapping wooden planks along the hull, much like fish scales. This method provided flexibility and lightness, while also offering excellent hydrodynamics and strength to withstand rough seas. The process began with the keel, the long, central beam that ran the length of the ship's bottom. Unlike modern methods that start with a full frame, the Vikings built upward from this foundational spine. The keel was carefully selected, usually made from naturally curved oak and carved to serve as the backbone of the entire vessel. From there, builders added the prow and stern sections, already hinting at the sleek, curved shape that defined the iconic Viking silhouette. Next came the laying of the first longitudinal planks, called strakes, starting from the base and working upward. Each plank overlapped the one below, and each was precisely notched to fit snugly over the previous one with minimal gap. They were fastened with hand-forged iron nails or, in smaller builds, wooden pegs. Excess iron was bent inward to form a rivet, sealing the joint. Between each overlapping layer, Vikings placed moss, animal hair, or cloth soaked in pine tar to seal the seams. This combination of precise joinery and natural caulking made the hull not only watertight, but surprisingly flexible, able to move with the waves without splitting. As the hull took shape, internal ribs, usually made from curved tree trunks, were fitted to reinforce the structure. These ribs were crucial for distributing pressure and maintaining the ship's integrity. Once the skeleton was complete, the deck was installed. It was typically simple, made of loose planks that could be lifted to access storage below. On warships, the deck served as a platform for warriors. On cargo ships, it allowed space for storing goods, animals, or provisions. The mast was another critical element, mounted in a reinforced base at the center of the ship. Early sails were made of wool, later replaced by linen treated with animal fat or wax for better wind capture. The square sail could be raised or lowered depending on the wind, but oars, usually 10 to 20 pairs, were also used to ensure control even when the wind failed. The steering system was also ahead of its time. Instead of a central rudder like Roman ships, the Vikings used a side-mounted rudder, essentially a steering or fixed with rope and controlled manually. This lateral control offered better maneuverability, especially for navigating narrow fjords or escaping rocky coastlines. What's remarkable is that all of this was done without screws, synthetic glue, or measuring tools. Symmetry was achieved purely by eye, relying on the builder's intuition and experience. There were no blueprints. The design lived in the minds of master craftsmen, passed down orally and through hands-on apprenticeship. Construction time varied from a few weeks to several months, depending on the ship's size and complexity. In larger coastal villages, it was a community endeavor. Dozens of people worked together, from felling trees to launching the finished vessel. Each ship represented the collective effort and pride of an entire people, and the moment of launch was almost sacred. It was common to offer sacrifices to the Norse gods, especially Njord, the god of the sea, to bless the voyage ahead. Watching a ship glide into the water for the first time was a moment of pride and reverence. From the first tree cut to the final nail driven, the process was much more than craftsmanship. It was a reflection of Viking culture, their bond with nature, and their constant drive to explore and survive. For the Vikings, a ship was far more than a means of transport. It represented status, identity, faith, and power. Each vessel built was a reflection of a society deeply connected to the sea, not just out of necessity, but by choice. It was through their ships that the Vikings expanded their territories, explored the unknown, and carved their name into history. These ships, especially the longships, were symbols of prestige. A tribal chief who commissioned a ship wasn't just displaying wealth, but also the power to gather men, resources, and skilled labor. The larger and more ornate the ship, the greater the authority of its commander. The prows were often carved with dragons, serpents, or mythical beasts, not only to intimidate enemies, but to offer spiritual protection. But the symbolism went deeper than appearance. Ships were sacred structures. Many Viking rituals included offerings before a voyage, sacrifices to gods like Njord, the god of the sea, or Thor, the god of protection, and celebrations during construction. In some archaeological digs, researchers have found remains of animals, like horses or bulls, buried near the keel, marking religious ceremonies. These vessels were also cultural bridges. It was by ship that the Vikings reached distant lands, from Iceland to Constantinople, touching England, France, and even the Caspian Sea. Wherever they arrived, they brought their language, mythology, art, trade, and sometimes colonization. The Viking ship was the physical link between worlds divided by thousands of sea. Ships even played a central role in death. Some Viking funerals involved burning the body inside a ship, sent out in flames across the sea, a scene immortalized in popular culture. In other cases, the dead were buried in grounded ships, turned into sacred tombs. They believed the ship carried the warrior to the realm of the dead, a bridge from this world to the next. In short, each ship was a living story, from the trees that grew slowly in Nordic forests to the hands that shaped each plank, from the journeys taken to the gods invoked. Every vessel was a masterpiece of both function and meaning. And even today, 1,000 years later, when replicas are built by experimental archaeologists, or when remains are unearthed from Viking graves, the reverence continues. These ships still tell stories, not just about how they were made, but about who made them and why. To look at a Viking ship is to look at the past, but also to see the present with new eyes. In an age defined by near-total dependence on technology, it's astonishing to realize that a people without electricity, without engines, without computers, armed only with incredibly simple tools, were able to build vessels that were advanced, durable, and efficient. The legacy of the Vikings goes far beyond woodworking. It reminds us that practical knowledge, adaptability, and respect for natural materials can be just as powerful as any digital innovation. The Viking shipwright knew the wood he worked with. He knew where it grew best, how long it would take to dry, how it would behave in salty water. Every strike of the hammer came from careful observation, collective experience, and a deep relationship with the natural world. In today's world, where most things are mass-produced and easily discarded, Viking ships offer us a valuable lesson. A lesson in durability and purpose. They were built to last, built to serve the community, built to cross uncertain seas with courage and conviction. And maybe that's what fascinates us most. Not just what they were, but what they represented. There's also something to be said about how knowledge was passed on. Viking shipbuilders didn't have formal schools, technical manuals, or online tutorials. They learned by watching, by doing, by failing and trying again, and by teaching. Knowledge was communal, alive, handed down from father to son, from master to apprentice. It was a way of learning that honored practice and the wisdom born of experience. And of course, we can't forget the mindset of exploration. Vikings didn't build ships to leave them docked. They sailed. They took risks. They faced unknown seas with courage. In a modern world where fear of the uncertain holds us back, that boldness still echoes, like a call. Today, when we see a replica sailing through a fjord, or gaze at silent remains in a museum, we can ask ourselves, with all our technology, are we building anything as lasting, as meaningful, as symbolic as the ships of the Vikings? Maybe the answer doesn't lie in the machines we use, but in the way we think, create, and connect to what we build.